So, hi everyone. First of all, thanks for joining me this afternoon. I also would like to thank again the organizers for this conference. I'm Professor Ives Silvestre from Federal University of Ouro Preto in Brazil. And today I'm going to talk about our experiments related to wet graphene membranes on a microfluidic platform. So I have worked on this project altogether with many collaborators, experimentalists and theoreticians. Some of them are from UFOP also. Some are from Federal University of Minas Gerais. Also, I'd like to thank them as well, especially Gustavo Ferrari, that was the PhD student behind this work. So first, I would like to talk about the motivation to work with graphene, especially in contact with liquids. Second, I will talk briefly about the design of our microfluidic device that was produced based on optical lithography and selective etching techniques. Our microfluidic device is very similar to this photo here. Third, for this talk, I'm going to present some results of our nano indentation experiments. So we'd like to study the mechanical behavior of two types of interfaces, graphene water and graphene oleic acid, and finally present conclusions and perspectives. Okay, so the motivation to study graphene liquids interface comes from the fact that graphene has proved to be a very powerful membrane, you know that. It has unique characteristics. So, as you see, there is plenty of room to apply graphene in devices that require a liquid environment to operate, like sensors and biosensors. So in this way, it's very important to really understand this interface, graphene liquids. So theoreticians have explored more this issue, mainly investigating graphene in contact with water, as we can see here in these papers. But in terms of experimental works, many of them investigate the influence of the substrate in graphene's wettability. So there is still a lack of investigation of these intrinsic properties of this interface. So I mean, without the substrate, and we want to give an experimental contribution in this context. Okay, so here is our microfluidic device. We start with a chip of silicon covered with a thin layer of silicon nitride. And after some steps of optical lithography and dry and wet etchings, we end up with a structure like this. So this is an SEM image of our microfluidic channel. So basically we have a lot of holes in the surface of the silicon nitride where the graphene membranes will be suspended. And we created this triangular buried channel connecting all the windows whereby the liquid will flow. So it's also possible to design the metallic contacts around the windows to perform electrical measurements if you want. Here is a real photograph of our platform. It has 1 inch side and 6 microfluidic channels on it. In the opposite sides of each channel, we have 2 big holes that are the inlet and the outlet for liquid insertion. In gold, you are seeing here the metallic contacts, but you are not seeing thousands of holes that are on the surface of each line. Okay, so we use this platform to pick a CVD graphene up on a DI water solution, for example, and we proceed with the cleaning process of the platform using suitable solvents, and so we let the sample dries. Okay, so these are SEM images of our platform surface. You can see here the film of graphene, the covered windows, the electrical contacts. For 3 micron side windows, we have about 7% of intact suspended membranes, what's a very high yield. And here in black, for example, we see a window that was not covered by graphene. Okay, so let's jump into our AFM results. These are tapping mode AFM images of the same graphene membrane with air and with water in the channel. So as you can see here, we can see here the height profile, the typical height profile cross section for the graphene membrane in both cases with water, with air and with water in the channel. And it's clear to see that when water fills the channel, there is a pressure-induced swelling of the membrane, which means that the water inflates the membrane, as this picture here illustrates. After the effort to characterize the topography of the samples, we proceed to nano-indentation experiments using a silicon tip. So now we would like to see the mechanical behavior of these two systems, graphene with air in the channel and graphene with water underneath the membrane. Okay, so here are the force versus vertical displacement plots obtained from these experiments, non-indentation experiments, in the repulsive force regime. So the red curve here depicts the mechanical behavior for the membrane with air in the channel, and the blue one shows the behavior for water in the channel. So the curves in principle look very different, as you can see. So for example, to reach the same indentation, to reach the same vertical displacement, the required force is considerably smaller for the water case. So it seems to be mechanically easier to compress the membrane in the presence of water. So apparently the membrane in contact with water is softer than when it's dry. But if you translate the blue curve into the red one, like in this graph here, you see that they are coincident at the high forces regime. What does it mean? So in reality, it means that 2D Young's modulus of the membrane is the same with or without water in the channel. We could explain this apparent softening, thinking graphene is as a lug drum. So when graphene is dry and suspended, it has a lot of wrinkles and ripples on it, as we can see here. And when water fills the channel, it inflates the membrane, uncrumpling many ripples, many wrinkles, and make the net area of the membrane bigger than before. So when the tip comes to indent graphene, it first deflates the membrane. And just after this, the tip starts really pushing graphene down. So this mimics a softened material, but is an apparent softening in the presence of water. Currently, we are working on graphene and oleic acid interactions. Oleic acid is has a very different surface tension compared to water, so it's interesting to have this kind of fluid in our platform. As we can see here, oleic acid also inflates the membrane even more than water. Also, we performed the same indentation measurements as described before, but now we are seeing the opposite effect. So now to reach a given vertical displacement, the wet membrane, the membrane with oleic acid underneath, it need to be under considerably bigger force than for the dry state. So we are trying to understand this apparent hardening now of graphene in the presence of oleic acid. Also, we performed a molecular dynamics simulation of the indentation curve, and we saw that we just recover the experimental force displacement curves if we introduce an attractive force in the system, like an adhesion force. So it's clear that the adhesion existent in this system, tip, graphene, oleic acid, is fundamental to explain this hardening of graphene. Okay, so as conclusions, our microfluidic device is a powerful tool to probe graphene liquids interfaces. Graphene preserved its intrinsic mechanical properties in contact with water, but there is something more for oleic acid. Now we are working on understanding the chemical transparency of graphene using different AFM tips. We are working on taking the adhesion properties of this system, tip, graphene, liquid, and we started to transfer other 2D materials into the platform as molybdenum disulfide. I'd like to thank our funding institutions and thank you all for the attention.